Josh Moore here. We're going to do a short little how-to on tune-ups. And, well, some of you are going to be like, what are you talking about? Tune-ups on a Chevette are really easy. Those of you with air conditioning know what I'm getting ready to get at. So stay tuned here in a minute, and we're going to get ready on how to go over that. All right, folks. So I'm in the process of redoing the tune-up on my 85 1000. And it has air conditioning. And I'm sure many of you that have air conditioning Chevettes have run across this when you've done the tune-up. It is a nightmare. One, because you can't get the distributor cap off with the air conditioner bracket in here, and this is why. Now, when you're doing a tune-up on these cars, there is no need to disconnect the air conditioning and get rid of it. So, you take your pivot bolt out right here, and you're going to take your two adjustment bolts out right here. And once they're completely out, the whole compressor will come out and rotate this way on its hoses and just come out of the way. I don't know how many times I've come across Chevettes where people have just said, screw it, and taken the bolt loose here, discharged the AC system, and then threw all this stuff away, going, I'm never going to do this again because screw trying to get to that. It's really not that hard. There is a little bit of trouble getting to the lower bracket bolts, but once you're down to here, if you don't need to do the cap and rotor, you're golden. You can actually set the timing because you can reach the distributor. You can get the plug wires off. What you cannot do is get the cap off. There's no way to get the cap off of here. So in order to get the cap off, you have to pull at least this bracket. Now, my bracket's been modified heavily because there really wasn't any need for the additional bracing that ran all the way down to the end of the block. However, you will take this bolt loose and this bolt loose. And then traditionally, this bracket will have an arm that runs down there to the bottom of the block. If you have power steering, God help you. Because, wow, it's a whole process. Because if you have power steering, you have to also undo a couple of these or a couple of these brace brackets so you can pull the power steering pump off, because it also shares the two bolts down there with this bracket. If you are fortunate enough to have only air conditioning, you're halfway there already. And you take the two bolts loose, this bolt, and that bracket comes out of there, and you can now access everything. I did this because screw trying to take all of that off down there when you have power steering. And there is more than enough bracing on here to not need the additional arm that runs down to the bottom of the block. So I hacked it off. It's in here good. I have not had a single belt problem with this air conditioning system in this car. So that's the way it's gonna stay. But in order to do my tune-up, I now have to take this bolt out and this bolt out at least. However, I no longer have to fight with anything down low. This bracket's gonna come right out. So I'm gonna pull that out, and then I'm gonna show you what I'm getting into. All right, well, as you can see with that bracket out of here, I have plenty of room to get the distributor cap out of there. Now, while the towers look good, and you can tell this is a factory one because it's still got the barcode sticker on it. While the towers still look good on it, and there was no corrosion buildup between the wires and the towers, on the bottom side, they're rather fuzzy on every one of these contact points. When they get like this, just chuck these things in the trash. They're cheap enough. And this one sat long enough that spiders built a nest in it right around the coil. Boy, that was a hot life for a short while, wasn't it? But at any rate, I'm getting ready to pull this rotor button out of here. It's fuzzy on the end, just like the contact points on the cap. Saying it's worn. I'm going to keep this one around because it's in better shape than most. But the cap's going in the trash. One thing to note on these air-conditioned cars, the factory put convoluted tubing around these for a reason. They didn't all get this, but definitely on the air-conditioned cars because of the heat buildup right here. And the wires running through here, it's real tight, they chafe. Just go ahead and transfer that to your new wires. So I'm going to go ahead and get this rotor button out of here, but I'm also going to go ahead and change this ignition module. And just because I'm already suspect of this ignition coil over here, because when I did test this coil, and as you can see, the bracket's also already spreading apart. Typically by the time the bracket spreads apart, coil's bad. But I've tested across here and I got way out of range on the resistance. I think it was like 8.5 and it fluctuated a lot. So there's a short in here as well. And then I think this is like a 5 ohm coil, 4 ohm coil or something like that. This one off this 2.8 that I got, same coil, but it tested fine across the primary and the secondary. Secondary on this one was somewhere around 8.5 K. You want somewhere around 9.5 to 10 K from one of these posts to here. This one passed. So I got a coil. I got some new plug wires. These are plug wires that were on scooter when it went to the meet. And the intention was always to pull them back off a scooter and put them on here. So they're already made, they're ready to go. One thing I am going to do though, because that module is suspect, that is the original GM ignition module. I'm changing it just because. It's not so much that it doesn't work. It's also not so much that I don't necessarily trust it. But I've already got a weak coil, and the coil was working hard on this thing, and I drove it every day with this bad coil. So I'm going to keep it as a spare because it works, but I've got an aftermarket module that I'm going to throw in here. However, when you are replacing this, you do absolutely have to have a thermal paste between it and the distributor body, and you don't want a lot. You want just enough that a super thin coating allows you to stick the module down, and when you pull it back up, it feels like it's glued to the distributor. And you don't want any more than it takes to make that happen. And the reason for that is thermal paste is literally only to fill in imperfections between the two metal surfaces. If you get any more than that, it no longer transfers heat. It now insulates it. Also, running something like dielectric grease is a no-no. Never, ever put dielectric grease between your ignition module and your distributor, or you will kill your ignition module in very short order. And the reason for that is it insulates the heat. So you have to have something that will transfer the heat. You want a thermal paste. You want something they sell specifically for these ignition modules. I don't have the part number off the top of my head anymore. It's been years, but they do sell it. It's a little tiny white pack. Or if you're a computer guy, you probably have some laying around from doing processors. It's the same thing. You're just going to use if you're a computer guy, you probably have a rather expensive version of the same thing that GM would have put on here originally. So you definitely want to make sure that's there. And I'll show you here in just a second. Now you can just see there is a faint amount of white residue down here on this distributor body right in here. Okay, I can wipe my finger across that. I can still technically spread that out, and it does transfer to my finger. And even after 30 plus years, there's still a little bit of it. I can still stick this down and it still makes like a noise when I pull it off the distributor because it's still tacky. But I'm going to replace it with new stuff when I put this down. Just wipe it clean on the distributor and then apply, like I said, just a little dab, maybe here, and then smear it about. You want it very thin. A little tiny bit goes a long way, and you may even have to wipe some of it off after you've stuck it down. It may feel like it slides around a little bit. You kind of don't want a floaty feeling. You want it to stick, and you want it to make it feel like it's stuck to the distributor. You'll know what I mean. Like it feels like it's glued down. That's perfect. And then you run your bolts in and it's fine. So, however, on the contacts right here, you can put just a dab of dielectric grease in these little plugs down here or on the little tabs, and that's okay, but never on that surface. This module as you notice, has a little ribbed area right here, and it grounds to the distributor through that. Make sure you use the thermal paste, and make sure you use as little as possible. It's important. If you want your ignition module to last, even a cheap one will last a long time as long as you install it properly. One other thing you may want to do while you're in here is make sure that your weights move. You can take your distributor plate and turn it, and everything should snap back nice and smooth. And then after you put your new rotor on and tighten it down, you want to give the rotor a little turn and let it go and see if it snaps back. As long as it does, everything's cool. If it's sticking, it may be time to take the springs off and take the weights off and clean the plate where they ride right there. It's also a good time to put a little tiny dab of grease on both of those little spots so those weights continue to move. Just like that. See how it snaps back? That's what you want. One other thing you're going to notice here is each one of these has a little bit of dielectric grease in it. This helps seal the connection to the towers. You also do the same thing at the plug ends. It also helps facilitate the boot removement if you ever have to take the boots off to change the plugs. Now when you're doing your spark plugs, anytime you are putting them in, make sure you start them with your fingers so you know that they are engaged in the threads so you do not have any cross threading. Then run them in till they seat by hand. And then you really only need to give them about a quarter of a turn and they're tight. You want to make sure you support the ratchet or the socket so you're not twisting. You don't want to just grab the handle and turn, because what happens is you start putting pressure sideways and you'll break the porcelain. So you want to put one hand on the socket and the extension to support it, and then give it a turn with your other hand. And that's plenty. When you're removing them, kind of the same thing applies. Support the socket, but then kind of like tap the handle of the ratchet with the palm of your hand to break them loose, and then you can usually just run them out with your fingers after that. And once we're back together, we're running. So the only thing I've got left to do tomorrow will be a road test, but it revs okay now. No more hesitation. Settles right back into an idle. So all I gotta do is verify my ignition timing, because that has changed a little bit, and then take it for a road test. So other than putting the compressor back, which is the 3 bolts and the belt, it's done. So the tune-up isn't horrible. Well, yeah, and I have to put the bracket back in. So unless you have a fully loaded car, it's not that bad to do. Now, tomorrow, I have finally gotten all the information I need to do the spindle swap. So, we're going to be going over this and the ball joint modifications for those that want to do the larger ball joint. We're also going to be going over a little bit of control arm stuff, upgrade control arm, things you can do to upgrade your existing control arm, and then all of the cool brake swaps that are going to come as a result of this. Also, we've come up with a way to not get 13-inch wheels on here, but we did find a way to get 14-inch wheels on here. However, I think I can still get 13-inch wheels on this spindle, especially considering most of you that are going to want a brake swap are probably also running something like a Monza wheel. So a 4x4-inch bolt pattern would be perfect. And as it turns out, Monza brakes fit this spindle. So there are a 13-inch wheel possibility. There's just not a lot of you that are going to be doing it. However, I'll outline that. So look forward to that. We finally have a legitimate bolt-on spindle that works too well, almost. As a matter of fact, there's even a combination of brakes that work with this spindle that will allow a normal 4-inch offset rear-wheel drive Chevy bolt pattern wheel to fit under the wheel well of these cars. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap up this evening. I'm overjoyed at the fact that my daily driver is back on the road. Probably before next weekend, we're going to be going over doing rear brakes because this thing needs rear brakes. And then I'm going to road test it tomorrow. So I may do a short little video on that. But in the meantime, you guys keep the shiny side up.